Hello and welcome to The Top Story, a podcast with the headlines of the day from our correspondents around the world. I'm Xizhi. Coming up in this edition, the Houthi group says it has launched a second attack targeting a U.S. aircraft carrier following fresh U.S. airstrikes. At least 59 people have died after a massive fire tore through a nightclub in North Macedonia on Sunday. And European brewers and distilleries are calling on the EU and the United States to settle their trade dispute. We start in the Middle East. A Houthi military spokesperson says the group has launched a second attack targeting a U.S. aircraft carrier in the northern Red Sea after the U.S. military conducted fresh airstrikes on Houthi targets. The spokesperson vowed via Houthi-run Al Masirah TV to expand attacks to include all U.S. naval and commercial vessels in the region if U.S. airstrikes continued. Meanwhile, the U.S. Central Command said in a post on X that its operations against the Houthi group continued, referring to fresh airstrikes against Houthi targets. The Houthi-run health ministry in Sana'a said the U.S. airstrikes have killed at least 53 people, including children and women. Rescue operations are underway to search for those trapped under the rubble. The U.S. airstrikes began Saturday evening as President Donald Trump vowed to continue air attacks until the Houthis stopped attacking international shipping lines and ships. Ahab Al-Fandi assesses the impact of the U.S. airstrikes in Yemen's capital city Sana'a.
American airstrikes targeted the Yemeni capital Sana'a on Saturday evening and into the early hours of Sunday morning, causing severe damage to businesses and homes. Debris from the bombings was scattered across the streets and alleys. As the smoke cleared, residents began clearing the rubble and recovering what was left of their belongings.
People were safe in their homes at dawn when the airstrikes hit civilians. There are injured people in hospitals, and even those who were already sick panicked because of the bombing. We have done nothing wrong. We're in civilian areas, not military sites. The attack caused injuries and deaths, and children were terrified.
The American airstrikes hit while we were safe in our homes. But no matter what they strike us with, they will not scare the Yemenis. We will respond to them in their own land.
The Ansar Allah group, also known as the Houthis, says its armed forces are ready to respond to the U.S. strikes. In a statement, the group denounced the targeting of civilians and civilian structures as a war crime.
The U.S. airstrikes on Yemen are seen by the Americans as a preemptive move to control Yemen's position and stop its support for Gaza by blocking Israeli shipping. But this escalation will increase tensions in the region. The Yemeni armed forces will respond. Any source of attacks against Yemen will be targeted at the right time.
According to Yemen's health ministry, many of those killed and injured in Sana'a and parts of Sa'ada province in Yemen's north were women and children. The impact of the American embrasure airstrikes in Sana'a is still unfolding. The number of casualties is rising. Rescue teams are searching for survivors under the rubble. As the airstrikes continue in areas controlled by the Sana'a government, concerns are growing about a worsening humanitarian situation amid reports of vital infrastructure being targeted.
That was Ahab Al-Fandi reporting. The health ministry in Gaza says Israeli airstrikes over the weekend killed over a dozen Palestinians. This comes as negotiators are trying to shore up a fragile ceasefire between Israel and Hamas. Israel says a delegation is in Egypt to discuss a Gaza hostage deal with senior Egyptian officials. Earlier at the talks in Doha, U.S. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff presented a new outline to extend the truce by weeks in exchange for Hamas releasing over a dozen more hostages. Jonathan Regev reports from Tel Aviv.
More hostage negotiations, Paul, yes, but only according to the Witkoff plan. Now we know what the Witkoff plan is all about. It speaks of the release of 11 living hostages and 16 bodies, remains of hostages. All along, we're speaking of 27 hostages altogether, nearly one half of the 59 remaining hostages. This is the mandate for the Israeli delegation to discuss, not any plan to move from the first phase to the second phase. This is the decision that was given after the security meeting. The security cabinet met along with the delegation that returned from Qatar over the weekend. So there is a mandate for the continuation of the negotiations, but only according to the Witkoff plan. At least on the Israeli side, the Israeli delegation has been given a mandate to continue with them.
That was Jonathan Regev in Tel Aviv. Moving on to Europe. At least 59 people have died after a massive fire tore through a nightclub in North Macedonia on Sunday. The pre-dawn blaze left more than 150 others injured, including some in critical condition. There are reports of a stampede as panicked people tried to escape from the crowded building, which was holding a live concert. The government has pledged a thorough investigation. Alyos Milenkovic has more.
On Sunday evening in Kochani's town center, people came to light candles to honor those lost in the nightclub fire less than 24 hours before. Surrounded by an eerie silence, hundreds queued to pay their respects. It is an enormous tragedy to take in for a city of only 30,000 people. Victims carried out of the club were checked for signs of life.
There weren't enough emergency vehicles, and people in their personal cars took some of the victims to the hospitals. There was chaos in the street. Some people were heading to the hospitals, and others were coming to find their loved ones. The young people were in a panic, and the parents were crying and screaming.
Authorities say the fire was sparked by pyrotechnics used by the band performing on stage, first setting fire to a small area of the ceiling before spreading through the entire club. There was only one entry and exit point for the entire club, which triggered further panic, and they crushed at the door as the hundreds trapped inside struggled to flee. Shaken relatives arrived on the scene in search of their loved ones, like this father of a 23-year-old Petar who survived the worst and is now hospitalized.
His hands are covered in burns, his head as well, and he says he's having difficulty breathing. He was taken to the nearest hospital by people who came to help. He was then sent to the hospital in Skopje. His friend called me in the middle of the night to tell me what happened.
Some of the injured in this tragedy are scheduled to be taken to the specialized military hospitals in neighboring countries. Most of the victims suffered deep burns. Among those killed was a vocalist in the band that was performing, and at least 15 people were detained for questioning, and others are under investigation, as officials here investigate possible bribery and corruption that allowed for such a tragedy here to take place.
That was Alyos Milenkovic on the deadly nightclub fire in North Macedonia. European brewers and distilleries are calling on the EU and the United States to settle their trade dispute. It comes after US President Donald Trump threatened to introduce a 200% tariff on alcohol imports from the continent, a measure which experts believe could devastate the entire industry across Europe. Rahul Pathak spoke with business insiders to find out more.
From vineyards and distilleries right across Europe, the continent's wide-ranging alcohol industry is asking the same question. How will they survive the latest round of tariffs from Donald Trump? It comes after the US president threatened to impose a 200% levy on alcohol imported from the European Union. This came after the European Commission said it would introduce a 50% surcharge on US whiskey imports and other products. That had been in response to American tariffs on European steel and aluminium. This complicated tit-for-tat trade war leaves many fearing that they will pay the price.
When we saw this announcement, at first we thought it was ridiculous. Then we said, but he's capable of doing so. Then we said, no, it's not possible, because it would make us all die. And we represent the art of living the French way. We are soft power. Americans love us.
The Americans are fond of French wines, with the US one of the most important markets for the European alcohol industry. In 2024, the US imported just over $14.3 billion worth of wine, beers and spirits. European alcohol producers say the American market will be impossible to replace. Many are annoyed that they're being dragged into a dispute that had nothing to do with the drinks industry, believing the EU was wrong to target US whiskey.
We're extremely concerned by the announcement, not only of the threat of 200% tariffs on alcoholic beverages from Europe, from President Trump, but also the inclusion of US whiskey and other US spirits in the retaliatory list of the EU in response to the completely unrelated trade dispute on steel and aluminium.
European winemakers say if the trade war continues, some companies will not survive. For the ones that do, exploring other markets like Asia and Africa will be key. But for winemakers like Florence Catiard, many are still hoping Trump will step back from his 200% tariff threat.
When you see what he tells to people in his book, he says that you have to strike very, very hard and then you have to negotiate.
That is Rahul Pathak reporting. In Africa, the Democratic Republic of the Congo will send a delegation to Angola for talks aimed at resolving the spiraling conflict in the eastern part of the country. Angola says it will try to broker direct talks between the Congolese government and the M23 rebels on Tuesday. Angolan President João Lourenço called on the M23 rebels to stop their advance into new areas and create a conducive environment for negotiations. The violence has forced nearly 370,000 people out of their homes since early February. Chris Okomringa reports from the capital Kinshasa.
There's no official communication from both sides, but I spoke to a person who's close to the DRC government officials, and he said that they welcome this ceasefire called by President João Lourenço, and they hope that the M23 rebels will respect it this time round. Both sides, have been accusing each other of violating ceasefires that have been called before. And, this is not the first time it's happening. The United States government, the Angolan president himself, the East African community, and the Southern African Development Community have all announced ceasefires since this conflict began in late 2021, but none of them has been respected so far. So we are waiting to see whether there will be a difference this time round. The DRC government has acknowledged receiving this invitation, and they haven't explicitly stated whether they will send a team, but I spoke to an official who declined to be revealed. He said that they have already put together a team of officials who will travel to Luanda, the capital of Angola, to attend these peace talks. The M23 rebels have issued a statement saying they have welcomed this initiative by the Angolan president and that they will attend. Fighting has been continuing in South Kivu province. The rebels have been fighting near the city of Uvira, and just recently they captured an island known as Idri. They held a meeting there and said that they will continue their advance to other parts of the DRC. Congolese officials are saying, look, we're in a situation where we're trying to have peace talks to end this conflict, but the rebels are continuing. So they're telling the international community that this is a group of people who do not keep their word and cannot be trusted, and that has kind of reinforced sentiments in Kinshasa and other parts of the DRC for the government not to hold talks with them.
That's Chris Okomringa in Kinshasa. Finally, in North America, U.S. President Donald Trump has signed an executive order seeking to gut U.S. Agency for Global Media, the parent company of Voice of America, and 6 other federal agencies. Popin Putin reports.
1,300 staffers at Voice of America, including journalists, producers and executives, have been put on paid administrative leave indefinitely. They were told in an email Saturday that they shouldn't come into the office as it's closed, and were instructed to return equipment such as computers and phones. This comes after a late-night executive order was signed by U.S. President Donald Trump, saying that the U.S. Global Media Agency, the umbrella of the Voice of America and other broadcast networks should eliminate all activities that are not required by law, essentially cutting off their operations. These cuts at Voice of America are part of a broader context. The cuts that we've seen in recent weeks, initiated by the Department of Government Efficiency to slash federal funds and cut government agencies. These reductions in force have impacted a number of departments, including Veterans Affairs. 80,000 have been slashed. The Internal Revenue Service could see as many as 45,000 workers lose their roles. 1,300 in the Department of Education were laid off, and the nation's Weather, Ocean and Fisheries Agency has lost 1,000 workers. A number of employees who have been laid off have been rehired. Other agencies have launched lawsuits challenging the legality of these widespread layoffs. Some have been told that they can return to work. In terms of Voice of America, it's unclear for how long the lights will be dark.
That's Popen Putin reporting. Tornadoes, high winds and dust storms have killed at least 40 people across parts of the U.S. National Weather Service meteorologists warn the main threat will be winds, but there's the possibility of more tornadoes. Nisa Soledad Paris reports.
It was a rough ordeal. Like I said, there was a deceased woman over here in the campground that's right here, which it's pretty mangled.
Violent tornadoes carved a path of destruction through several states in the U.S. Midwest and Southeast on Saturday night, leaving dozens dead in their wake. The deadly twisters were part of a massive storm system that spattered the region throughout the weekend. Missouri was hit hardest, with at least 12 fatalities confirmed across 5 counties after multiple tornadoes touched down Friday.
This was widespread in the different areas it hit, but the one mobile home park was the most casualties and people are injured.
In Wayne County, Missouri, resident Dakota Henderson described the harrowing rescue efforts he joined Friday night, including saving his aunt.
She was trapped in that bedroom, only room standing left of this house. She was trapped in it. We got her out the window, got her up to the Earth home that's up the road. And we were helping other people. We found a few bodies that was out in the field, a few deceased people. And there was a guy that was probably about a quarter mile back behind us through all these trees and debris.
That's a tornado.
Mississippi Governor Tate Reeves declared a state of emergency after confirming several deaths in his state.
Oh, man. Oh, no.
Fatalities and injuries are also reported by officials in Arkansas as a powerful storm swept through their state. Dozens of tornadoes are reported to have touched down since Friday across the Midwest and South, while the dangerous low-pressure system now continues its movement through the Southeast.
Sunday morning, around 200,000 people across impacted states were without power. 9 million people are under tornado watches, including in Mississippi, Alabama, Tennessee, parts of Georgia, and northern Florida.
That's Nisa Soledad Paris on the extreme weather in the U.S. And recapping today's headlines before we go, the Houthi group says it has launched a second attack targeting a U.S. aircraft carrier following fresh U.S. airstrikes. At least 59 people have died after a massive fire tore through a nightclub in North Macedonia. And European brewers and distilleries are calling on the EU and the United States to settle their trade dispute. And that's it for this edition of The Top Story, a podcast that brings you world headlines every weekday. For more news in politics, business, sports and culture, you can subscribe to the Beijing Hour, a 1-hour podcast news magazine program. We will welcome and appreciate all ratings and reviews. I'm Qizhi. Thanks for listening.